Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're going to spend some time with Government Gangsters, a book by Kash Patel. It pulls back the curtain on his time in places like the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Department of Defense.
Patel's career path is fascinating. He was a public defender, a federal prosecutor, worked on Capitol Hill, and even for President Trump as a top aide.
Talk about an insider perspective. In Government Gangsters, he doesn't hold back when it comes to what he thinks is corruption in these institutions.
Right, and it all starts with his early life and career. His strong belief in due process, that was there way before Washington.
Okay, so let's start there. He thought about medicine at first, but something drew him to law.
It's interesting, working as a caddy on Long Island, he talked with some of the lawyers playing golf there. Their stories really got to him, and yeah, planted the seeds for a future in law.
It's amazing how chance encounters, can change your path. So law school, but not exactly out of passion for justice, was it?
Yeah, initially he saw it as a ticket to a high-paying corporate job, but life had other plans, and he ended up a public defender in Miami.
Wow, that's a big change. Especially with him working with staunch left-wing colleagues while his own views were changing.
Yes, and those clashing ideologies, they're a theme in the book. He talks about hypocrisy, especially when it came to which clients some of his colleagues would defend.
He mentions they defend some criminals, but not cases like sexual assault. Do you think that shaped his view of, real due process?
Absolutely. He believes that everyone, no matter what they're accused of, deserves a fair trial. And that commitment, it led him to the tough cases others avoided.
He even caught a federal prosecutor lying in one of these cases. Can you tell us about that?
He found out the prosecutor had lied about paying Colombian police for evidence. It's what's called a Brady violation, basically withholding evidence from the defense, a big breach of legal ethics.
Wow, that is serious. And even with Patel giving the prosecutor chances to admit it, they refused. What does that tell us about people in power and being accountable?
This experience seems to have really solidified for Patel that some government people are more about protecting themselves, their careers, than doing justice. And that keeps coming up in the book.
He even had a run-in with a judge who he felt was targeting him unfairly during a terrorism trial.
But even with that, Patel kept his eye on the big picture. He prioritized, getting a guilty verdict against the terrorists.
That shows his commitment to national security. That unwavering focus on the mission, it seems key to Patel.
It definitely seems like a driving force, which brings him eventually to the Department of Justice.
This is where things heat up. Patel saw what he calls endemic corruption inside the DOJ, especially during the Benghazi investigation.
He was a federal prosecutor then, so he saw the decisions being made. And he says the DOJ, even with evidence against a bunch of terrorists in Benghazi, chose to only prosecute one.
Wait, why? He says they were trying to protect Hillary Clinton, who was running for president at the time.
Yes. He thinks that a big trial, bringing up Benghazi again, would hurt Clinton's campaign.
That's a serious accusation, manipulating justice for politics. It really makes you think about how much politics affects these institutions.
And it's not just the DOJ. Patel has strong feelings about the FBI's actions, too.
Right, he says the FBI had evidence against the Benghazi terrorists, but chose to keep quiet.
Does that add to his view that these agencies are political?
It definitely plays a part. He sees it as proof that they're political and that they'll protect certain people while going after others.
He even compares Benghazi to what he sees as a selective prosecution during the Trump years.
Like Steve Bannon, who was charged with contempt of Congress. And he contrasts that with Obama officials, people like John Brennan and James Clapper, accused of lying to Congress, but nothing happened legally.
So a double standard in how cases are handled, depending on which side you're on. That's his point. He sees this pattern again and again. The treatment of Hunter Biden, for instance, compared to the January 6th protesters, it raises the question, are these just isolated things, or is there a system-wide bias?
A question every listener will have to think about. It's clear Patel sees a pattern, and he doesn't let the media off easy either.
He accuses them of being part of it, of perpetuating these false stories and protecting certain people.
He even shares a story about a journalist who made up a whole investigation about him and how he handled classified documents.
That must have been frustrating. It's obvious these experiences have shaped his view of the media.
It seems like he sees this trend of powerful institutions protecting themselves and, manipulating information to control the story. A pretty disturbing thought, isn't it?
It definitely raises concerns about who to trust and how information is used to influence what people think.
Okay, so we've seen how these early things shaped Patel's view of justice and accountability. Things get more intense when he gets to the House Intelligence Committee.
This is where the investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election comes in. And the Nunes memo is really front and center.
Now, this memo was pretty controversial, right?
Absolutely. The memo, Patel helped write it, was meant to show what he saw as the FBI overstepping, particularly their use of the Steele dossier to get a FISA warrant to spy on the Trump campaign.
For those who might not know, can you explain FISA warrant and why this was such a big deal?
A FISA warrant lets the government watch suspected foreign agents. There were strict rules for how you get those warrants, and Patel was saying the FBI broke those rules.
So he was basically saying the FBI used their powers for political reasons, not for, like, actual national security.
Exactly. And this is a bombshell. It really shook things up in Washington. It definitely did. Democrats said Patel and Devin Nunes, the committee chairman, were trying to, like, mess up the whole Russia investigation.
So, like, Patel walked into a tough situation. He talks about facing pushback from what he calls the deep state. What does he even mean by that?
For Patel, the deep state is this network of people in government agencies who he thinks are more interested in keeping their own power than, actually serving the American people. They work in the shadows to make things happen, to stop anyone who challenges them.
So, like a hidden power structure working against the people. Sounds almost like a conspiracy theory.
I can see why someone might say that.
Mm-hmm.
But Patel insists this isn't about conspiracies. It's about real people making decisions that impact the country.
He describes facing threats, attempts to stop the memo from coming out, even a face-to-face meeting with the Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein.
Yeah, that meeting is interesting. Patel asked Rosenstein point blank about the Steele dossier, which, remember, was at the heart of the FBI's case.
What did Rosenstein say?
Patel says Rosenstein seemed surprisingly clueless about big parts of the investigation, like the dossier's origins, how they got the FISA warrant, all of that.
That's wild, considering Rosenstein appointed Robert Mueller as special counsel to investigate all this.
That whole thing, it really solidified Patel's distrust, It made him believe even more that they were hiding things.
So the memo coming out didn't end things. It kind of made things worse.
It definitely escalated things. Patel calls it a double down by the deep state. They used Mueller's appointment to keep investigating Trump, even though Patel says Mueller had the same info he did.
So Patel thinks the Mueller probe was basically a political hit job, trying to take Trump down.
That's what he believes. He's very critical of Mueller and his team, saying it was a witch hunt. After 2 years, Mueller found no evidence of Trump working with Russia.
That must have felt good for Patel after all that scrutiny.
You'd think so, right? But it wasn't over. This leads us to another big event, the raid on Mar-a-Lago.
Crazy. The FBI raiding a former president's home. What did Patel think about that?
He saw it as another attack, politically motivated, trying to make Trump look bad and stop him from running for president again. He questions, if the raid was even legitimate. It was authorized by Merrick Garland, the attorney general.
Why did they even raid Mar-a-Lago?
It was about classified documents Trump had taken from the White House. But Patel says that was just an excuse. The real goal was to hurt Trump politically.
He seems to compare this to Hillary Clinton and her emails.
Yeah.
How she was accused of mishandling classified stuff.
Yeah. Patel says Clinton was never raided, even though she had way more classified info.
A double standard again, based on your political party.
Exactly. More evidence, he says, of a two-tiered justice system.
This is some heavy stuff. Got to remember, this is all Patel's take on things. Listeners have to look at the evidence and decide for themselves.
Absolutely. We're sharing Patel's perspective, but it's super important to think critically about it.
So Patel goes from all this chaos to the National Security Council working on counterterrorism.
Yeah. Even there, less partisan, he still faces pushback.
He was accused of being involved in that whole Ukraine thing, which led to Trump's first impeachment.
Shows how much they hated Trump, and anyone close to him, any chance to make them look bad, they took it.
But even with all that, Patel talks about the good stuff at the NSC.
Like, helping get hostages back shows that national security can work well when it's done right. And then there's the raid that killed that ISIS leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi.
A huge win against terrorism.
Absolutely. Patel praises everyone involved, from both the DoD and the CIA, for their skill and dedication.
It seems like he's critical of certain people, but he's still, respects those agencies and what they do.
He separates the people he thinks are bad from the institutions themselves. He wants to reform them, not get rid of them.
Which brings us to him becoming acting director of national intelligence, the DNI. What was he trying to do there?
Patel's big focus was overclassification in the intelligence world. He saw it as a lack of transparency and accountability.
So trying to make intelligence more open.
That's right. He thought too much was classified for no reason, which made it hard to hold people in power accountable.
Did he run into any problems trying to do that?
Yeah, he definitely did. Career people who were used to secrecy, they pushed back, didn't want to release anything that might show wrongdoing or, embarrass powerful people.
The old guard fighting against change, basically.
Yeah, that's a theme throughout Patel's story. And it brings up a big question. What does he think should be done about all this?
Good question. A big part of the book is his plan to fix the DOJ, the FBI, intelligence, and even the DOD.
His argument is that these reforms, they're necessary to protect people's rights, prevent abuse, and make people trust those institutions again.
What kind of changes is he talking about?
He starts with the DOJ. He's really against how special counsels are appointed, thinks the system is too easily used for political reasons.
He wants to change the FISA process too, right?
Yep, more transparency, stricter rules on getting those warrants, worried about abuse and people's privacy being violated.
And then there's his idea of moving the FBI, getting them out of Washington. Why does he want to do that?
He thinks that would take away some of the political influence and corruption. Being in D.C. makes them too close to politicians in the deep state.
It's a big change, but it makes you wonder if there's something to it. What about his ideas for the intelligence community?
He's all about transparency there, too. Wants a permanent office for declassifying things, going through classified stuff and releasing it whenever they can.
Sounds like he wants balance between keeping real secrets and the public's right to know.
He also thinks the intelligence community is too big, too bureaucratic, wants to streamline it, make it less wasteful. That'd save money and make it harder to politicize.
And the DOD, he's got some thoughts there, too.
He's a big believer in civilians controlling the military. Criticizes times when he says military leaders went too far, got involved in politics.
He really goes after General Mark Milley, right? The chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
Yeah, he says Milley undermined the chain of command, went beyond his authority.
And he's not a fan of how the DOD buys stuff either.
Right. Talks about all the waste and fraud he saw, wants a better system for getting weapons and equipment.
So he's suggesting big changes to a lot of parts of government. Are these reforms realistic at all?
That's for each listener to decide. Patel definitely thinks they're necessary to protect our democracy. But putting them into practice, that would take a lot of political will, and overcoming those who benefit from how things are now.
A tough task, for sure. And this brings us to another controversial topic, Patel's account of January 6th. His role at the DOD, overseeing the National Guard going to the Capitol.
This is a crucial moment for him because, there are accusations that Trump started an insurrection.
Patel says, flat out, that Trump authorized the National Guard before January 6th, knowing there might be trouble. He also points out requests for help from Mayor Bowser in D.C. and the Capitol Police.
He says the DOD responded quickly, showing they were ready to send troops to protect the Capitol.
But there's a lot of conflicting info about what happened that day and who's to blame. How does Patel address that?
He thinks the whole story around January 6th has been twisted, to make Trump and his supporters look bad. He points out problems with the timeline and says key evidence was left out.
Like, he doesn't buy that Trump was trying to overthrow the government while also sending in the National Guard to protect the Capitol.
Right. If Trump was really doing a coup, he wouldn't have authorized the Guard ahead of time.
He also questions what the FBI did that day. Says they knew about potential violence, but didn't share that info.
He finds it suspicious, how some people in the crowd seem to be starting fights, wonders if they were planted there to make things worse.
So Patel's thinking is that January 6th was used for political purposes.
Yeah. He sees it as part of this bigger effort to make Trump and anyone who supports him look like the enemy.
And he's not happy about how they treated people arrested for January 6th. Says they were wrongly denied bail and put in solitary confinement.
He compares it to how they handled other things, like when Stephen Colbert's staff got arrested. Another example, he says, of different treatment depending on your political side. It all goes back to that idea of selective prosecution, using the justice system to target whoever they see as enemies.
And Patel himself was called before the January 6th committee, had to testify. What was that like?
He says they were more interested in pushing their own story than actually finding out the truth, accuses them of leaving out evidence that didn't fit their agenda.
So another example, according to Patel, of the deep state doing its thing, using power to silence their opponents.
That's how he sees it. And he thinks this is part of a bigger effort to shut down dissent, to demonize anyone who goes against the system.
He even uses Biden's words as an example, how he called Manchurian Republicans a threat to democracy.
He thinks it's meant to silence people, to make them afraid to disagree.
That's a pretty dark view of politics.
Mm.
Makes you think about free speech and what's happening to our democracy.
It definitely makes you consider those things, how we talk about politics, what we believe.
So we've looked at how Patel sees the deep state and its impact on government. But he doesn't just complain. He offers solutions.
Right, he believes in doing something, not just talking, wants to fix the problems, not just point them out.
He's got this plan to change the system, starting with the DOJ. What's he suggesting?
He wants to limit the power of special counsels. They shouldn't be able to just start investigations. Congress should have to approve, and there should be more oversight to stop them from being used as political weapons.
And FISA reform too, right?
Yeah. He thinks those warrants are too easy to get, the process is too secretive, wants stricter rules, more checks and balances from the courts, more protection for people's privacy. Think back to the Nunes memo. That's where this all comes from.
Yeah, that really changed how he viewed things, made him distrust the intelligence community and all that spying stuff. Moving the FBI, that's a big idea.
He's serious about it. Taking the FBI out of Washington would, he thinks, take away some of that political pressure, make them less corrupt. Being in D.C. makes them too vulnerable to politicians and the deep state.
Makes you think, for sure. What about his plans for intelligence?
Transparency is key there. He wants a permanent office that's always declassifying things, reviewing secrets and making them public whenever they can.
A big change from how secret they are now.
He also thinks they're too big, too much bureaucracy, wants to slim it down, cut the waste, save money, and make it harder to be political.
And what about the Department of Defense? He doesn't like how they do things either.
He believes in civilians running the military, not the generals. Criticizes times when he says military leaders got too political. He's really hard on General Milley.
And he's got problems with how they buy weapons and stuff.
Yeah. He wants a system that actually works, that gets the stuff we need for defense, not just stuff that makes contractors rich.
It sounds like he thinks the government is way too big, too powerful, and not accountable to the people at all.
That's the heart of his argument. The people don't have enough power. The elites have too much, they're secretive, and they're only looking out for themselves.
And he wants to change that, give power back to the people, make the government work for them, protect their rights and freedoms.
That's his goal. It's something a lot of people will agree with, especially those who are worried about the country.
Gotta remember, these are just ideas. Making them happen would be hard and take a lot of people wanting it.
True. And there'd be a lot of people fighting against it.
But Patel's book is like a wake-up call. He's telling us to get involved, to demand more from our leaders, to fight for what's right.
He thinks our democracy depends on it.
He's really saying, get off the sidelines, get involved.
Yeah.
It's a powerful message. So we've talked about the dub state, this shadowy force, but Patel also names names, specific people he thinks are behind all this. Who are these government gangsters, as he calls them?
He doesn't hold back. Calls out high-ranking people from both the Obama and Biden administrations, plus career bureaucrats who, he thinks, were all acting politically. He says they abused their power, broke the public trust, and basically tried to undermine democracy.
Strong words. Does he pack it up? Is there evidence?
He does. Uses his own experiences, public records reports, even court documents. He lays it all out, each person, why he thinks they're guilty.
So not just, throwing out accusations, but an actual argument with research.
Exactly. It's not just conspiracies. It's a structured argument with evidence.
That's important. Gives the listener, stuff to work with so you can decide for yourself. Who are some of the big names he focuses on?
Some you'll definitely recognize. James Comey, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, all FBI. John Brennan, James Clapper from intelligence, even General Mark Milley, the top military guy.
Wow, he's not playing around. Taking on some big names. What exactly does he say they did?
A whole range of things. Leaking classified info, manipulating the media, blocking investigations, even using law enforcement to go after political enemies. He says they broke the law, went against democratic principles, and betrayed the trust people put in them.
So he's seeing a pattern, right? Like, they don't care about the law, and they'll use their power for themselves, for their agenda.
That's what he's arguing. He thinks these people, they put their own power and their politics ahead of the country, ahead of what's right.
That's pretty harsh criticism of them and the institutions they represent.
It is. And Patel wants them to be held accountable. He wants to see consequences and reform so this doesn't happen again.
Let's talk solutions. We touched on it earlier, but what changes does he specifically want?
His main thing is limiting the power of the administrative state. That's where he sees the deep state coming from.
Yeah.
Smaller government, less power, that's less likely to be corrupt.
That's a common idea. Limited government, more freedom. How does he want to make that happen?
It's a multi-pronged approach, as they say. For the DOJ, he wants limits on special counsels. They shouldn't have so much power. Congress should have to say yes before they start investigating, and there needs to be more oversight. He doesn't want them to be political weapons.
And FISA, that's a big one for him, right? Those warrants for spying?
Huge. He thinks they're way too easy to get, the whole process is too secret, wants higher standards, judges should be more involved, and people's privacy needs to be protected. The Nunes memo, remember? That's where this all started, seeing how FISA can be abused.
Yeah, that was eye-opening for him. Made him lose trust in the intelligence agencies and all their spying. Moving the FBI, that's a pretty radical idea.
He's dead serious about it. Get the FBI out of D.C., away from the politicians and the deep state. That'll make them less corrupt.
Food for thought, that's for sure.
Yeah.
What about reforming intelligence?
Transparency, transparency, transparency. That's his mantra. Too much stuff is classified, hidden from the public. He wants a permanent declassification office, constantly reviewing things and releasing them.
So, less secrecy, more accountability.
Right. And he also thinks the intelligence world is bloated, too much bureaucracy. Slim it down, get rid of waste, save money, and make it less political.
What about the Pentagon? He's got plenty to say about that, too.
He's all about civilian control. He doesn't like it when military leaders get too powerful, too involved in politics. He really goes after General Milley for that.
And the way they buy weapons and equipment, that's a mess, according to him.
Big time. He wants a system that actually makes sense, that buys what we need for defense, not just whatever makes the contractors happy.
His message is clear. The government's too big, too powerful, and doesn't answer to the people.
Exactly. He thinks the balance is all wrong. The people have lost power, the elites have taken over, they operate in secret, and they don't care about us.
And Patel wants to reverse that. Give power back to the people, make the government work for them, protect their rights.
That's what he's fighting for. A lot of people will agree with him, especially those who are worried about where the country is heading.
It's important to remember, though, these are just proposals. They'd be hard to make happen and take a lot of effort.
Absolutely, and there'd be pushback from the people who benefit from how things are now.
But Patel's book is a challenge. He's saying, don't just sit there, do something. Get involved, demand better from your leaders, fight for what's right. He thinks the future of our democracy depends on it. This deep dive into government gangsters has been a journey through Kash Patel's experiences, his concerns, his solutions. We've explored his claims, the evidence, what it all means. Now it's your turn. What do you believe? What resonates with you? What will you do? Keep thinking, keep questioning, keep learning. The future of our democracy is in our hands.